The honourable member for Vermilion, Lloydminster.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for their cooperative effort in allowing me to speak to this Bill 31. I'd like to start by saying, Mr. Speaker, that earlier today I contacted the Office of the Ethics Commissioner with regard to a specific question on my participation in this debate. And the Ethics Commissioner has advised me to state the following, that both my wife and I are currently not actively practicing as veterinarians, although we both hold licensure in the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association. However, we do own a minority share in a business that has property that rents to a veterinary clinic amongst other tenants. I have disclosed this information to the Ethics Commissioner, who has advised that I may participate in these debates and vote on this bill. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by saying that I'm in general agreement with a lot of the principles of this bill. How can one argue against consumer confidence and consumer protection? And I agree when the minister says that consumer confidence is vitally important. Having run a successful small business for close to 30 years, I recognize that consumer confidence is everything. And the ability for people to trust me as a trusted professional is the greatest asset that I had in my practice. And I would do nothing to jeopardize that asset. And I think that is a statement that is true of all veterinarians. You know, so it's interesting when we're reading through Bill 31 how the government in each case is addressing, areas where there is public concern of people operating on what I would call the fringe of otherwise reputable business ventures. And so you can imagine my shock and surprise and that of my colleagues when we get to the last 3 pages of the bill where the veterinary profession comes under direct attack by this government. I suppose I should thank the minister that nothing else I've ever seen has galvanized our industry in the same way that this bill has. And I should thank the minister that she has unified both the veterinary profession, both the registered veterinary technologists who were admitted to the profession thanks to Bill 13 from the Minister of Labour, and veterinarians, some practicing for only a very short period of time, some still students, others who've practiced for 40 and plus years and are now retired. It's a little bit offensive when our proud profession is lumped in with ticket scalpers, curbers, and loan sharks, Mr. Speaker. But that's what this bill does. And when it comes to the consultation process, Mr. Speaker, the consultation process on this bill consisted of 2 phone calls that were basically could be summarized as, brace yourself, this is what is coming. That is not responsible consultation, and it certainly is a far cry from what we enjoyed working together with the Labour Minister on Bill 13. So my objections, Mr. Speaker, to this bill are fourfold, and they all deal with the veterinary profession. First of all, I object to the clauses with regard to informed consent and prior fee disclosure. Second, I object to the clauses dealing with advertising by veterinarians, specifically the advertising and publication of fees. Third, I object to the broad, unlimited, and vague powers that are given to Cabinet in setting regulations under Section 48.3 sub 1 and giving precedence to those regulations over regulations made by ABVMA Council, as is stated in Section 48.3 sub 2, which in essence strips the veterinary profession of the privilege of self-governance that we have earned and discharged faithfully for over a century since this province was less than 1 year old. And finally, Mr. Speaker, my fourth objection is the lack of proper consultation with the profession. So let me go through these individually. First of all, informed consent. The provisions in this Act, specifically 48.1 and 48.3 sub 1 C and D, requiring informed consent are completely and totally redundant. Informed consent and prior disclosure of fees is already mandated by the bylaws of the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association, and the use of proper consent forms for all procedures is an audit requirement under the practice inspection and practice standards requirements of our profession. Our practices are regularly and routinely audited by inspectors that go all around the province. And I know this because I know a number of the auditors, including the president of the association, who has been a practice consultant and a practice auditor. To suggest for even a moment that veterinarians perform procedures on their patients without owner consent is not only completely wrong, but deeply offensive to veterinarians in our province. And yet, when this piece of legislation was introduced, that is exactly what 3 different media outlets, and I will table their news stories, that is what they stated in their news articles. That was the impression given. The impression was given that currently veterinarians do not have to obtain informed consent from their clients. Veterinarians do not have to disclose the fees for procedures from their clients, and that now something new will happen that will be required of veterinarians. That is wrong, it is false, and it casts our profession in a very negative light and lumps us in, as I said before, with ticket scalpers, loan sharks, and curbers. You know, Mr. Speaker, as you can probably guess, I'm passionate about our profession. Well, you don't work at something as long as I have and not get passionate, not just about our profession and about our clients and about our patients, but our contribution to Alberta. You know, but I'm not alone. I received this in one of the hundreds of emails that I have received, and I know that most of the members opposite and most of the members on this side have heard from my colleagues. So this, from a registered veterinary technologist, and she said, and I quote, "I am a veterinary technologist and have worked in the veterinary profession for over 25 years. We have always disclosed fees for administering treatments, as this is a provision already existing in the practice inspection and practice standards bylaw and is just plain good common sense to avoid conflict with our clients and ensure we are providing the best care possible for our pets." Now, what did we just hear from the minister? We heard from the minister that the goal of these provisions is so that they could choose the best veterinary services. Choosing the best veterinary services involves proper consultation, proper disclosure, and obtaining informed consent. There is no question about that. And so, Mr. Speaker, that provision within this act is completely unnecessary and redundant. It's already there. Section 2, advertising fees for procedures. You know, this is an issue that has been discussed by veterinarians throughout the course of my career. And I will say that each and every time that it has come up within our association, our members, acting together, debating the issue together, have rejected the advertising of fees and the publishing of fees as being unprofessional and the potential for leading to the commodification of veterinary services. Mr. Speaker, this has been tried elsewhere. It was tried a couple of decades ago in British Columbia and resulted in the almost total implosion of the association. Veterinarians started undercutting, and veterinarians not only started undercutting prices, but more alarmingly, they started undercutting the procedures. There are certain things, Mr. Speaker, in veterinary medicine that you can do to reduce the cost of providing, especially a surgical procedure, but they are not in the best interest of the patient. And the people who are the best judges of what is in the best interest of the patient are the people who have been trained, in some cases for 8 or more years, to become veterinarians, who are licensed, who require continuing education to keep up their skills. They're the ones who are in the best position to decide what is in the best interest of the patient and then to communicate that to their clients. This bill takes that away from veterinarians and puts it in the hands of cabinet. Mr. Speaker, that is wrong. The jurisdictions that have tried that in British Columbia and Ontario and also a number of the states in the United States in all cases wish they could turn back and remove the advertising of fees. Veterinarians don't want to advertise fees, and the few that do, Mr. Speaker, have always been voted down by the vast majority who feel that it does not lead to a more professional veterinary association. So, Mr. Speaker, just buying or choosing your veterinarian based on the lowest price, just like it's wrong to choose the contractor for the Calgary Cancer Centre based on the lowest price, is wrong. It does not necessarily get you the best product or the best service, and if it's right for construction of buildings, surely then it is also right for the selection of obtaining veterinary care. Another quote from a registered veterinary technologist. In my experience, people would rather go to a veterinarian who they trust than shopping for the cheapest option. The public already has choices and can use whomever they wish to care for their pets. I would hate to see animal care reduced to a dollar figure versus what is best for an individual patient and their caregivers. Mr. Speaker, it is very clear that the Pandora's box of fee advertising and fee publishing, which has been tried in other jurisdictions, would be a mistake. Mr. Speaker, veterinarians have a duty of care, and this brings me to my third point. This bill would place that duty of care in the hands of Cabinet. So I ask the Health Minister, do you feel qualified to decide whether there should be a regulation as to whether a 2-year-old collie pup should be treated with ivermectin for internal parasites? I asked the Infrastructure Minister, do you feel qualified to decide whether a 6-year-old cat suffering from osteoarthritis should be treated with acetaminophen? And I asked the Finance Minister, who I know is a horse racing fan, if you were presented with a 1,200-pound thoroughbred stallion who is showing signs of abdominal pain, would you feel comfortable deciding on whether you should advise to have that horse's gallbladder removed? Well, Mr. Speaker, in all three of those examples, it's absurd to expect members of Cabinet to know what the best course of action is. But if they were to answer yes to those three questions, in the first two cases, the collie pup and the cat, it would result in the death of the patient. And in the third case, well, that was a bit of a trick question from the Minister of Finance's horses don't have gallbladders. But Mr. Speaker, I don't expect the Minister of Finance to know that, and I don't expect Cabinet to be able to make regulations for the veterinary profession. They are not qualified. But since 1906, since the very first Veterinary Profession Act, Cabinet has had final approval on every regulation and every bylaw passed by the Veterinary Medical Association. They have final say on anything we pass, so they still have that power. This bill would turn that power over first to Cabinet, and then it says in consultation with the association. Well, let's talk for a moment about consultation. The consultation on this particular bill was shameful. And what was so alarming was that it was such a departure from what we enjoyed during the lead up to Bill 13, which was in May of 2016, after months of consultation with the Minister of Labour, who, by the way, is responsible for the Veterinary Profession Act, not the Minister for Service Alberta. After months of consultation, the introduction of Bill 13 resulted in the incorporation of registered veterinary technologists into our profession. A very positive step, one that has been embraced within our profession. It has brought a unity within our profession that I have certainly enjoyed, and I thank the Minister of Labour for her respectful consultation on that issue. Then, this summer, when our association learned that there was a survey going around asking questions about veterinarians, letters were sent to both the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Service Alberta. In mid-August, the association president waited 2.5 months to hear back from the Minister of Service Alberta, and in that letter, which arrived barely a month ago, on the 2nd of November, that letter stated, and I quote, "Further consultation and engagement with industry stakeholder will be necessary to develop the details of any potential legislative or regulatory amendments." Where's that consultation, Minister? The truth is, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. There were 2 phone calls from the ministry office, and all requests to meet with the Minister of Service Alberta went unanswered. Mr. Speaker, 2 phone calls are supposed to be the basis of consultation to turn the veterinary profession completely on its ear and to reverse over 100 years of operation. Mr. Speaker, we talk about consumer confidence. Veterinarians are one of the most trusted professions in Canada. A survey last year indicated that we're the third most trusted profession in Canada, behind only nurses and farmers, at 87%. By comparison, politicians only have support from 23%.
Order member for Drumheller Stettler under 29-2A.
Marvelous to hear the member from Vermilion, Lloydminster, talk so eloquently about his profession, former profession, and I was wondering, he's missed out on a couple words that I think he hasn't talked yet about due diligence and care and compassion that are demonstrated by the industry, and I'd appreciate if he'd elaborate on that.
Honourable member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly we take the responsibility for due diligence very, very seriously. But, Mr. Speaker, there is no question in my mind that the best people to discharge that due diligence are, in fact, veterinarians. And when I think that if we were to ask Albertans, who do you trust in terms of taking care of the animal population of our province? Who do you trust in making laws and making regulations that determine cases of animal welfare? Do you trust a group of politicians who have a trust level of 23%? Or do you trust veterinarians who have a trust level of 87%? I should point out in Alberta it's even higher, it's 93% in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, to suggest that there is a problem here is not true, and to suggest that there's been consultation is also not true, but that's what they've been told by the minister. For example, one of the constituents who wrote to one constituency office was told during this consultation process, we met with the ABVMA and other industry stakeholders. We have also heard from ordinary Albertans who told us they want to be better informed when looking for veterinary services for their pets. That's why we're proposing reasonable new rules requiring fee disclosure that are in line with other provinces like BC and Ontario. That fee disclosure has been in place in Alberta for years, Mr. Speaker. And then to another person who wrote to a NDP constituency office, thanks for the email. My understanding is that the government did consult with the AVMA and that the elements in Bill 31 were a compromise negotiated with the association. So if this is not correct, please let me know. I'm letting the member know it's not correct. The association did not agree to Bill 31, and it will not agree to the provisions that turn our association and lump it in with used car salesmen, ticket scalpers, and loan sharks. Mr. Speaker, I've received in the last 3 days, as this is yet another one of these bills that is being jammed through at the end of session, hundreds of email correspondence from members. But the one that really struck me was one from a veterinarian who's only been in practice for 3 years. And he wrote, he's a veterinarian practicing in central Alberta, I find these proposals very invasive and infuriating. We are an honest profession, which is full of good-hearted, hard-working, compassionate people. Following through with the changes proposed by Bill 31 without consulting members of our industry will harm our profession. It is another example of this government's ignorant overstepping without proper due diligence. This makes me very upset. I feel this is a step in the wrong direction, which will ultimately misguide the public to value price over quality. I strongly urge our government to retract these amendments. This is a misstep which will shift the focus of veterinary medicine away from providing the highest standards of care. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to go down that road. We don't have to go down that road. This government is trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. You heard the statistics on complaints. I sat for years on the discipline tribunal and hardly had anything to do. Veterinarians are an honorable profession, and when things go wrong, we do our very best to make it right with our clients. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply offended by this bill, specifically the provisions for the Veterinary Profession Act. But I know that we will have another opportunity to discuss it. So at this point, Mr. Speaker, I would move to adjourn debate.